Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Deep Dive Film School uses the footage only for purposes of education, commentary, and criticism under fair use. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School.
This week we're going to continue our Surreal Comedies Festival with Stephen Chow's 2004 movie Kung Fu Hustle.
Let's dive in. All right, everybody. I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Palcher. Please like and subscribe if you like what you see and hear.
Yes.
We love your support. Thank you very much. Search for us on all of the things.
All the places. All the places you find all the good stuff.
That's right.
There you go.
If there's good stuff, just type in Deep Dive Film School and you'll find us
We'll
there.
probably be there, too.
All right, so 2004, I remember seeing this movie in theaters. It's
me
one
too.
of Hong Kong's most highest grossing films ever. I think it got taken over in 2011 by something that I had never heard of. But before that was his previous movie, Shaolin Soccer.
Yes.
And Stephen Chow, you know, outside of that, he did CJ7, which is like a weird robot adventure movie.
Yeah, and he's done a couple of other earlier...
I can't remember if I've seen it or not, but it wasn't as memorable as those his first two.
Some of his earlier stuff was... Again, I think he was...
Now I'm talking as an American, too.
Right, and that's what I was going to say, is I think a lot of his earlier stuff was really popular in China, but it's kind of amazing how much Kung Fu Hustle resonated in the States.
Yeah.
But I would also say that it's like, it makes perfect sense that it did, because even though it's really playing with a lot of character types and stereotypes and tropes and sort of cliches that are very embedded within Chinese culture and Chinese media, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
Sure.
But even though that is true, even as a Westerner, growing up watching Kung Fu movies and watching a lot of these movies that maybe utilize these same types of characters and these same sort of cliched ideas, seeing it done this well, where there is a huge influence of everything from Quentin Tarantino to Terry Gilliam.
For sure.
You know, I think that
Roger
that kind
Ebert
of...
said it's like Jackie Chan and Buster Keaton meet Quentin Tarantino and Bugs Bunny.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
I thought so too.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. And
Great Robert.
I know.
Roger.
Mr. Robert Ebert. Robert Egert.
It's Roger's brother.
But I definitely think
successful.
one of the things, Robert Ebert.
He's skinny.
Yeah, so definitely from frame one here, I think that you can see the influence of somebody like Terry Gilliam.
For sure. I mean, there's a variety of things that we'll get to, because I think along with someone like Bong Joon-ho, we're going to reference a lot of great directors throughout this review, I think, because he definitely either pays homage to or is straight up inspired by Return of the Dragon or something. Like there's lots of that here. Now, in the States, there's not really a ton of huge Chinese directors, right? Like looking at film history from our perspective, you have Zhang Yimou, who did like To Live, and he went on to do House of Flying Daggers.
House of Flying Daggers,
and
that's
Hero.
Raise the Red Lantern. Is that the same guy?
I believe so.
Yeah.
And then you have Wong Kar-wai,
yes,
who made one of our all-time favorite movies, In the Mood for Love.
Yes.
And a variety of other amazing things as well. And then you have probably the two biggest are John Woo.
Yes.
And who went on and did tons of action movies. I think still does stuff to this day. And then Ang Lee, who's technically Taiwanese but part of the Chinese Republic. And I think Ang Lee's probably very well respected throughout all the different variety of things he's
and done the widest
well.
variety of styles
No
of
doubt.
film. Like if you look at everything from because Crouching Tiger is his, right?
Ang Lee, yes.
Right? So if you go all the way from that to something like Brokeback Mountain, you're like, wow, like there is a lot
Absolutely.
there.
No, his
and of course,
genres.
the Hulk.
Sir!
Jesus. Hit him with the phone. General, I'll let you know if we need you.
Unacceptable. Unseat your asses down there immediately. I want a full court evacuation now. I'm shutting you down.
Locked down.
Yeah, of course, the classic Eric Bana Hulk
Oh, God.
movie. But no, Ang Lee is outstanding. But I really wish, looking at all those directors, like To Live is such a fucking fantastic
It is
movie.
one of the all-timers.
I agree. If you haven't seen that movie, absolutely do that. But Stephen Chow, I'm really kind of bummed he hasn't made more stuff because this movie is so goddamn fun.
He's so good.
I'm like constantly smiling through this movie.
Yeah.
And there's things that are funny.
but the
no doubt,
inventiveness,
but
the
like,
inventiveness is just
I would rather have
staggering.
a consistent grin and be happy watching something and be, and just have a funny few parts than laugh the whole time and have it just be off the wall crazy and just trying to keep up with it.
Exactly.
Like,
and as we talked about last week with Wet Hot American Summer, it's like, the set piece or the sort of hanger for the movie is this one thing.
Pigsty Alley.
Yeah, and then when Wet Hot American Summer, I'm saying, and then the jokes just hang over it, and wherever they land, that's where they land. It's more about laughing.
Yeah.
And here, the thick, rich, really deep tapestry of these characters' lives, their motivations, the things that happen to them.
Still using an ensemble too.
Total ensemble, which you do not expect because you're like, okay, the director is the star, and so this is going to go in really one direction. And it's interesting because he's playing with some really big genre types here, right? And obviously, one of the classic ones is this sort of like hero's journey, right?
Sure.
Like this main character. But then he loved this, I think it's called House of the 47 Tenants, which is really what Pigsty Alley was based on. It was a really famous 1970s Chinese film.
And where Stephen Chow grew up as well.
Right. And so this idea of we're going to have all these characters. And really the whole first half of the film is not about Stephen Chow's character. He's this background character who kind of sets a lot of things. He sets a lot of things in motion, but then we kind of forget about him because there's so much more interesting stuff happening than him and his buddy. And so when it comes back to them, you go, oh yeah, how do they fit into this? And how Stephen Chow allows them to fit back into the main plot line is really brilliant.
I agree.
And so much fun. But let's maybe go through a little bit of some of the plot devices here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so we're in, I think, 1940s Shanghai.
Yes.
We get this amazing opening scene. This opening shot, actually, of everyone is still, but the camera is going kind of down this alley.
Yes.
And we go into this room where this gangster, I believe he is the Crocodile Gang.
Crocodile Gang.
And he's beating someone up for stealing his wife.
That first shot of one of the cops shattering the sign that says Super Crime Fighters.
Yeah.
And then one of the cops shatters that sign. You're like, oh, the cops are not the super crime fighters that they claim to be, right?
But we get the rival gang, the Axe Gang, who ends up being the main gang throughout the movie.
So cool.
Got to be one of the coolest gangs in movies
All time.
history, right?
All time.
Because like they have this great like dance when they're going up about to kill someone, and it's like so fun, and like you're just like, I want to be part of that gang.
Right.
And that's funny because it's funny I say that because that's what Stephen Chow's character wants
That's
to
what
do.
he wants to do. He wants to be a member of the Axe Gang.
He's impersonating being an Axe member, and he comes in with his chubby friend and has the fake tattoo.
The fake tattoo of the axes.
And says he's a boss, like, give me a free haircut. Actually, you pay me for him getting a haircut.
He
here.
looks too good. He looks
like,
too good, right?
He's a man-child in a way as well, you know? Like, he's kind of irresponsible and does silly things and is reactive and like steals things.
Oh, so
and, like,
reactionary and just constantly yelling, right? And he's just so petty. And what's really interesting is there's this, this movie deals with a lot of sort of like Eastern philosophy concepts, but it kind of toys with them very easily. So like, this entire idea of the Buddhist palm technique of fighting and all this kind of stuff. It's like it likes to play with that where it's like, oh, this is a 20-cent booklet that some guy in an alley gave you, right? And then later we find out, no, it truly is mystical and all these different things. But this idea that Chow's character of Singh, that his chi is clouded, right? And it's clouded through his own pettiness and his own anger. And that's literally, he literally gets it beat out of him at the end of this movie that turns him into the hero. But I love this idea that chi, the clouding of it, is why he's so reactionary and is why he's so petty and why his pathway is meandering and he doesn't know what he's supposed to do. Because, and should I do it now? Should I don my Professor Bullshit hat for a second?
Please, let's do it.
So,
can you put a little hat on yourself right now?
Bing. Yeah, we'll put one on there. So, and this is really interesting because I didn't know that this is in particular what these were called, even though if you think about it, at least from a Western audience standpoint, we know this well-worn territory so very, very, very well because of, I would say, probably the TV show Kung Fu. I'd say is probably the easiest representation.
For me personally, growing up watching Jackie Chan movies, I think Bruce Lee movies as well.
Bruce Lee movies, you're going to see a lot of this. The type of entertainment is referred to as wushu stories, and it's basically a really old type of Chinese fiction. So this predates movies. They're really almost like dime magazines, right? About these warriors. But if you think about it, all of this is stuff that you're like, oh yeah, this is total pop culture stuff, where you're talking about the heroes in the wushu fiction typically don't serve a lord. They don't have any kind of military power or belong to any kind of like rich aristocratic kind of group. Rather, they tend to be blue collar. They come from the lower social classes, but they all have this like really powerful martial arts training, right? And usually they keep it hidden, and they're kind of that loner, right? Like David Carradine in Kung Fu, right? Sure. Where he's gonna wander the earth like Kane in Kung Fu, right? But one of the interesting things when reading about this that made a lot of sense was, yes, there is this idea of justice and individualism and loyalty and courage and all these things of you would never gouge out an opponent's eye. Only one of the bad guys would do that, right? It's this very almost Boy Scout level kind of honor and code. But one of the other interesting things is that in the wushu stories, more often than not, rather than having an official sword or some kind of a weapon that they would use to fight with, they would use everyday objects, musical instruments, baking implements, ink brushes, benches, fans. And I was like, oh my God, that's all of our characters. That's everybody from Pigsty Alley, right?
Yeah.
So he really is playing.
Or the bad guys they fight.
Or the bad guys they fight. Yeah, these sort of Blues Brother type bad guys. But
the claws.
Yeah, with the claws and the crazy like magical axes that they're flowing through from their loot. Yeah. But I love this idea that these are very tried and true things that if you think about it, we see and we go, oh yeah, these are all, he's playing with these stereotypes and tropes from the Kung Fu world.
Sure.
But to the Chinese audience, this is probably hilarious on a level that we don't even understand.
For sure. Apparently, the translation in English, there's lots of jokes that are completely missed and changed. So I think there probably is a lot lost in translation, especially culturally, like you're talking about.
Right.
But I do have to say, his stylization here is outstanding.
Right.
I'm talking about the color, the framing, the scale of some of these things.
Oh, those sweet Dutch angles. He loves those things,
it's amazing,
man.
Though. It works so well. He does really fun stuff with the editing as well. It's quick, fast paced, like moving around and like makes things really fun. And the pacing just keeps going, and you're just always engaged. And
it's always fun too. It's every time that you think, well, that's the most
fun.
That's the most ridiculous part. Then he ups the ante even further. And the way in which we have these characters, I'm thinking of the tailor and
we're kind of introduced
the
to
bread maker,
few
like
of the people in the Pigsty Alley. But you think you're just you get the landlord who is kind of just taking advantage of these
sleazy
things,
guy,
and just one guy runs a laundromat and one guy is a baker, like you said, and he's just trying to skis his way out of whatever he can because his wife, the landlady, who's obviously a major part of this movie and this town.
Yes.
She owns this whole building.
Yep.
Pay me rent, fuckers.
She is such an incredible character.
Outstanding.
Too. Just with the curlers in her hair and always the cigarette in her mouth. And
at a point we're watching a cartoon, right?
It totally is. Yeah. I mean,
especially her character. She's the Roadrunner.
Ebert said it like that. Yeah, exactly. This Bugs Bunny-esque thing. Now, again, in talking about some of these influences and references and where some of that's come from, The 1982 Chinese film Buddha's Palm. So again, right down to even the little pamphlet that you get as Buddha's Palm in this movie is Buddha's Palm. I watched this the other night because they were talking about how much Chow references this. And since it's 82, he doesn't, this director doesn't have any CGI, but we have scenes where a character kicks another character who's easily 25 feet away, and they do straight up painting on the film, on the film negative, like his foot stretches all the way out to kick the guy and comes all the way back. And even though the storyline is different, I was like, oh, as far as like just the artistic influence here, they're doing straight up literal cartoon where a character is doing this with their hand and we're seeing little cartoon flames coming off and making somebody's head go boing, 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 and so it's just really interesting.
The magical realism here is excellent, right?
Yes, it definitely is.
And I think you kind of quickly understand that that's the world you're in. It takes a second, but you kind of quickly understand like, oh, okay, this isn't quite normal. You kind of get a little taste of it with the guy who's carrying the rice bags on his back, and
he kicks the last one.
You're like, holy shit, that guy's strong, and he probably really did that. I'm sure he did. But you're like, oh wow, okay, there's some, that's just kind of a unique thing to see. You're not, you're in this weird,
but then it goes
weird little town,
one level above that.
Yeah, and it just keeps going and going to the point where, at a point, his lips are like the size of tires, like
it's Roger Rabbit.
It gets that exaggerated within this movie, and you buy into that world, kind of like what we were talking about with Hot American Summer. You have to buy into what they're doing, but once you get it and can understand the cultural stuff that they're trying to do, it's just an entertaining, funny movie.
And you know what helps with that also, of buying into it or like believing in that, in the absurdity of them running like Roadrunner, and the Coyote, or his lips being, the size of like, again, like I said, it looks like something from Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that really helps with that is that it's shot in this cotton candy bubblegum hyper reality that reminded me so much of Jean-Pierre Jeunet.
Sure.
Right? It looks so much like City of Lost Children, these bright greens and blues and pinks.
Well,
and
once she like throws her husband out the window, and it looks like she kills him.
Yep.
And then a plant falls on his head and like
flower
kind of
pot
breaks.
again. Looney Tunes.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then you're like that. You're still not sure at that moment, and then he kind of is like,
yeah.
And they're like, oh, okay, so we're in a place where you can survive something like that.
Right. And actually, the fact that our enemy here, the Axe Gang, that's our main enemy, other than a couple of early black and white, and again, I think it's important that they were in black and white, photos of crime scenes, there is almost no blood happening here other than somebody gets punched and they might get a bloody nose. But for these guys carrying around axes, and even we see some limbs get cut off here and there, but there's only a tiny bit of blood. It isn't like gore all over the place, which you would expect from the Axe Gang.
I'm almost surprised this movie's rated R, to be honest.
Me too.
There's a few like curse words.
Actually, the worst thing is how many boys' butts are hanging out of their pants.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing. That's another thing where I'm like,
well, it's the same boy too.
Yeah, it is. That is true. And that is like, okay, culturally, I would say that's the one thing that rang a little tin ear to me. And maybe it's supposed to be because it's the 1940s, but I bet it has more to do with the fact that it's, a movie for a Chinese audience. But for 2004, the gay characters are pretty rough. Like they're not treated very well. Like they're pretty broad stereotypes compared to some of the other characters who have a little more depth to them.
For sure. I mean, you have every type of person in Pigsty Alley, though.
That is true.
You're kind of just running the gambit on all these types of people, and then we come to find out, the Axe Gang generally doesn't mess with Pigsty Alley because it's a poor community. There's nothing for them to really benefit. And but so the Axe Gang kind of starts invading them. They get a one of the guys gets his back broken, and they shoot a firework up that is an axe, and that calls the gang into the city.
Yeah.
And and that kind of starts what this whole movie is around, is just them coming in, and you realize quickly that this town doesn't give up. Like, they're actually a pretty strong-willed town and will stand up for themselves.
And has a surprising...
They're not intimidated by the Axe Gang.
Well, they have a surprising number of master warriors who are trying to live regular lives because they don't want to fight, which again I think is subverting this trope again of the sort of wushu style that we talked about, where it's like, oh, they're simple people, but they're very loyal and they believe in justice and they believe in all these things. And it's like, again, this is, you know, when we were talking about what makes some of these movies more surreal is the anachronism here. And I think the anachronism of taking a wushu style story, but then saying what we're going to lay over it is more of the nihilism of the early 2000s, where characters are like, I just want to be left alone.
Yeah.
I don't want to save anybody's life, right? And that our main hero, his chi is so clouded that he even wants to join up with the bad guys. Like, that's super unique. We don't see that in this type of a story.
And he does at a point. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is when he first gets to Pigsty Alley and he starts calling people out, saying he's part of the axe gang.
God, it never
and you have
ends.
this crowd of people like saying, what the fuck, let's go.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, you, the short one. And then the guy stands up and
he's like 9 feet tall.
And then you're like,
the one that's an old man, and he's just the
like
biggest,
ripped,
buffest dude.
Arnold Schwarzenegger body. And then a little kid who also has that body.
Yep.
But just these little, like, hey kid, you want to fight? Let's go. Like, he keeps degrading himself a little bit because he's all talk.
He's all talk, and he runs away, and then once he's far enough away, then he starts trying to call the person on again. He gets his ass kicked by the guy with glasses on the subway, right on the train, right? And it's like just that kind of stuff. It's very, very funny. But again, I think that one of the only things that's a little not difficult, it didn't ruin anything for me, but his sort of secret, or the fact that he, you know, when he's trying to heal from the cobra venom and his lips are all big and he's punching out the walls, you know, in this very cartoony moment. And
I love that scene.
I love that scene,
cool.
But I think in rewatching it, I was like, it's hard to tell what I'm supposed to make of that scene, other than it's really interesting.
It's really cool, though,
it's really,
how they shot it.
I totally agree. It's just that them trying to say, see, he actually is sort of this superhero,
he's something, but
we don't know what. I think that could have been built up a little bit better than it was. It didn't ruin anything.
It does come out
but
of nowhere a little bit, and it doesn't ruin anything. You're correct, but like
it's not as earned as it could be.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, but it does show you that he is clouded, and like this is his potential, maybe, right? But once that's unleashed, then, but like I did think that was a very inventive way to show that scene with the circular thing on a stoplight. I've never seen that before.
that him and his buddy are always kind of hiding out in. Like, it's a very weird. Well, I wonder if it's like a
almost.
Well, I wonder if it's like a pedestal for like a traffic cop or something.
Or it
could be something
with a gun or something that's just kind of keeping security locked or something. I'm not sure, but
I do like the way that we unpeel some of his backstory and where a lot of his sort of nihilistic selfishness comes from.
Where he got the Buddhist palm booklet.
Right. Well, and then the girl that he tries to save, and then when we get that girl that's, you know, that the adult version of her is working as the ice cream girl, and there's this amazing moment that again is sort of like, I mean, it's almost like someone ringing a gong to be like, huh? Did everyone get the reference? When he grabs her and holds her in the exact same pose as the giant poster behind them.
Yes.
And the giant poster behind them is for the 1941 movie Top Hat, the Fred Astaire film, that has a dance number in it that's called White Tie and Tails, that has a whole crew of guys that look exactly like the Axe Gang.
Sure.
All doing their little shuck and jive, all doing their little shimmy. So it's obviously... That's got to be where the influence completely comes from of the whole dance number, right? I'd love that he puts the poster right in it.
That point, but I think the action you could very well. It's funny you say Fred Astaire because like you think of how the pacing of Singing in the Rain happens, you know, and just,
totally,
and just those scenes. But
and
I think
what that set even looks like, what that street even looks like our town here.
But the action in here is like a dance as well, right? Like I feel like we're dancing. You know, you have the Axe King that does it beforehand, but like. It's a ballet when they're fighting sometimes. I mean, this is post Matrix. This is post Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So we have that technology at this point.
Yeah, this really wire dancing kind of thing.
Yeah,
and Crouching Tiger again is a really interesting reference because not only for I think a Western audience was that one of the first times that we saw that sort of wire work ballet style fighting. Done really seriously, right? I think that you could look back at like, oh, we can watch Enter the Dragon or like, you know, whatever, Kung Fu Jones. and like we can see this stuff, but we always would think of it as being a corny 70s thing, whereas in Crouching Tiger, to see these characters running up reeds of bamboo, and our brains going, we're supposed to take this seriously. And this movie does that, but also toys with it at the exact same time, which is part of what makes it really fun, is that he can stomp on someone's foot and it flattens out, a la Bugs Bunny, but then he can throw a spear and then jump on the spear and run off of it, and you cannot help but have the 12-year-old inside you go, that's so badass.
Well,
right?
You do. I think, to get back to the flashback for a second, I think what we end up coming to find out in this movie is that for both her and him, he gets peed on because he tries to protect her.
It's so rough.
It is. It's kind of
like the second that happened, I was like,
it rated R.
Ooh, wow!
Yeah,
like
that's the only thing I could maybe think that makes it rated R. But like,
it's a little over the top.
We
for
come
a bunch
to find
of
out
kids.
that was actually a pretty pivotal point in both of their lives.
Yeah, it disillusioned him completely on the entire idea of
part of why he's clouded,
being a good guy, of martial arts in general, right? That like the world isn't actually like this. And again, anachronistic, right? That's it's a very cynical point of view for a martial arts movie that's supposed to take place in the 1940s. Easily the funniest moment in this movie to me is when he keeps getting the knives thrown in him with his friend. Just like bounce off the wall, and when he sticks him, and then pulls it out, and he's like, and he sticks him. He's like, oh, and then he puts it back in his arm, and you're like, oh my god, it's so rough. Yeah, and then the snakes bite him. Like, oh man,
it's just so funny. And when they get bounced off the wall, they just keep finding their way into his body.
And then later, he's still got him in him, and when he's running away from her, he uses it as a side mirror to see that she's running up behind him. Yeah. He's looking in the reflection of one of his knives. It's a funny gag.
It's like, it seems kind of generic, but it totally works.
It completely does.
The sense of humor in this movie is really light for the most part, though, wouldn't you say? Like, it is like a cartoon.
It is. It is very light. Yes, I agree.
And even the fighting is silly to a point, right? Like, the characters, I don't know, just the people that we're dealing with here, they're exaggerated to the point where it's fun. Like it keeps it interesting because you're like, okay, where are they going next? Because this is already a pretty wild movie. Although I will say that it definitely keeps you wondering of where it's going. But I think that one of the things that's really a brave move on his part is to take these three characters who we see first as normal people. So these are kind of the heroes.
The tailor, the tailor and the baker, and they keep calling him something, but I think again it's a cultural thing. I don't know what it means, but he's basically the guy who's just like there to do all the heavy lifting. Rice carrier, yeah, for lack of a better term. Yeah. But those three, we meet them first as these ordinary, albeit, one of them very strong people. Yeah. But man, like these really cool these techniques they have with his, his bracelets, it is so cool. And I think it's so unique. And then we like the characters of them also. And we get this great moment of the three of them doing a duel with each other afterwards,
spar.
And the sun setting, and then they all kind of bow to each other. And then
I have to say, before you jump to the next scene here, I really appreciated and noticed this time something that I hadn't really thought about before, is that almost every person doing action and fighting in this movie is a middle-aged Chinese person.
I noticed this.
Outside of the one strong guy we see at the beginning, it is. But that's pretty amazing because normally you would reserve those. Now, if you do some research and see who the people he's actually hiring, that's a different story, and they definitely have that background.
Yeah, the guy who plays Mr. Beast came out of retirement to do this movie.
A lot of people did. The landlady hadn't been in something in 19 years.
That's right.
But like the people that do most of the fighting, which makes it just adds this weird layer to it. You're like, this is not a normal action movie.
None of this looks the way that it should.
Yeah, there's some. Yeah,
and that's really interesting that you say that, because if you think about it, the Axe Gang are all young guys in their 20s. They're all they look like your regular like karate age guys, where it's like these guys are all in great shape.
They're in their prime.
And then you have the landlord, who's like the most schlubby little like guy with his crappy hair and all that, and he isn't even really fighting so much as doing all these weird, like, wiggly maneuvers.
That guy was Bruce Lee's stunt double for years.
My God, was he?
Yes.
didn't know that.
Exactly, right?
That's so cool.
These unassuming people and actors that haven't done anything in a while, maybe have some kind of history of them being a certain type of kung fu fighter or something like that, and maybe not to the level of someone like Bruce Lee, of course, but they have that clout in a world that we're not used to. So we see that and we're like, wow, that's so strange.
It makes you think, this isn't what Ebert meant when he referenced Tarantino, but Chow did a really Tarantino thing here, right? This is a David Carradine pull. This is funny, a Travolta pull, right? Where you go, oh my God, yeah, he got Kurt Russell in this movie, right?
A Chinese version of that.
Yeah, and so it probably has that same effect for that audience where they're like, that's Bruce Lee's stunt double.
For sure. I think there's some stylization here with Kill Bill, that kind of stuff that you can kind of see some similar references from the, similar movies and inspirations.
Definitely. So we have these three characters and we're learning to really like them. And even though they're being kicked out of Pigsty Alley, we now really feel invested in these guys and we're going to follow their story. Then Chow, in an incredible fight sequence that is both parts exciting and also spellbinding and silent for the most part, other than the sound of this musical instrument, this lute. Other than that, by the end of that fight scene, he kills those three characters that we love.
Yeah, pulls a psycho.
It's wild, right? And at that point you go, well, now what the hell am I watching? And then we go back and we follow Sing's, the character of Sing again.
And the landlady.
And the landlady, but they even don't show up for a minute, right? Like, we just stick with Sing for a minute. But I think what I love about that is, you were saying, it makes you go, well, where the hell is this movie going? And it is very cartoony, but at the same time has this lovable aspect like something like Amelie, right? Where you just feel... You're just happy. You have that smile on your face.
You say Amelie?
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that.
But then... he kills some characters and you go, okay. There are stakes.
Yeah.
Right? There are stakes here. Like that girl that he saved when they were younger, maybe she dies. Like, we don't know, right? And so it's like that suddenly pulls it apart just enough that we sit back up again, right? In a way. And I think that it means that as much as this world is a silly putty world where the landlord can fall out and smack to the ground, that at the same time, like, there actually are real stakes here for some of these characters, and those stakes raise even more once we meet the Beast.
For sure. Well, I think we have to say too that Chow essentially, does get hired on by the boss of the one with the grimy teeth. That guy's awesome.
I love him.
He's great.
In fact, those two guys in particular, both of those bosses. So there's brother Sum.
He keeps hitting that dude to get out of the way.
Yeah, that whole sequence. Oh my God, that is one of the laugh out loud moments for me though. Is when they're in the car, they've just witnessed everything happen, and then the Blues Brothers style guys finally get their asses kicked.
Yeah.
And then they're looking out the car, and then he looks into the front seat of the car, and the landlord's there, and he goes to tell the other guy, and the landlady's sitting in between them. I laughed so hard because I'm like, genius. That is one of the best hard cuts.
Yes.
To just it's so funny.
She's got that cartoonish cigarette that she's always
and her
smoking.
arm around both of them.
And of course she's got the lion's roar, which becomes a huge thing. And
yes.
She smokes this whole cigarette in one breath.
And then just can bust out windows. I mean, it's like it breaks the sound barrier. But again, there are these characters with these superpowers, and the only thing that I can think is that
they're going through the levels of the bad guys, right? The first guy, now these two.
Yeah, we need another assassin and another assassin.
So Chow goes and gets the best killer in the world, right? He's
this total schlubby old guy with the worst hair and these glasses, and he's got those slippers on those prison slippers that he wears. The only thing that I can really think is that I wonder if from a cultural perspective, from a Chinese perspective, again, playing with these kinds of archetypes, right? And that's really what these characters are, these archetypes.
For sure.
But it makes me wonder, is this more akin to like a Guardians of the Galaxy style thing where it's like they are superheroes, but we're going to subvert all these expectations of what a superhero does. So that makes the audience love it because they're like, I've never seen these types of characters act this way instead, right? Like I just wonder like how that's received in that way. Because again, it's like you're going to go find the best assassin ever and he's wearing his prison slippers, right?
Yeah.
And like he's getting punched in the face and he's going harder, harder. And you're like, he's our main badass, and we know that he's going to be the big heavy.
Yeah.
But everything about the way in which Chow presents him subverts all of that, right?
Totally.
And that's really funny to us.
When they do start fighting, it becomes like, oh, okay.
Yeah, he kicks that hole in the wall. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just, again, I think that
and it's like he's kind of the Joker crazy where he's masochistic, right? He just wants to fight the best or get killed by the best.
And I love that moment where they're all sitting around the poker table with all the poker chips,
showing
and
respect and just like,
and he's like this, and he's like, I don't care. He's like, even if I just get killed by you.
It's the aura,
you know,
of a real master.
Yes,
right?
yes, where they don't have to fight. They can sit. And again, to talk about Kill Bill, you know, you think about the making sandwiches sequence, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, here's these two incredibly powerful characters that you know
Having
have
a
to fight,
conversation.
and they're having a conversation,
Yeah.
right? And that's the same moment here, and that's really fun. I think that those, and God, again, like I don't know how many movies that Chow had done by this point, but talk about being confident in your craft to be able to feel like in that moment, like, oh, I can just have these guys talk.
He
like,
really
I can,
leans on slow motion a lot.
Yeah.
In this, but it's wonderful. Like it's
Because
obviously we have the wire work that you were talking
Yeah.
about earlier, and that's part of it. But like, man, it's a dance. Like I was saying
it's
earlier.
the orchestration, it's the camera movements, it's the set pieces. Because again, and again, to reference Jean-Pierre Jeunet in something like an Amélie, it's rare that anything that we see doesn't look like it's on a soundstage somewhere, and purposely so.
Sure.
Right? I mean, there is, again, you just think about the tableau of Pigsty Alley. It might as well be the courtyard for Rear Window, right?
Yeah, totally.
There's so many little stories happening, and the camera lingers on that stuff and just goes from room to room and shows us
that's fun,
little
yeah.
bits and pieces of jokes, right? And
Yeah.
maybe you don't even get the whole
They're
joke.
cha-cha dancing and
Yeah,
stuff.
all this kind of stuff. Or that, like, in one segment, landlord and landlady are talking. Then by the time that it gets to the next window, she's fucking hitting him again and going, is that more lipstick on you? Right? Like, and it just keeps moving around like that. But it really plays with big bombastic moments that feel like a musical.
Yeah.
And then these really, really quiet moments where you can hear the crickets in the background. And that's part of what makes this movie so unique is, again, like you said, just the pleasure of watching it. Right?
sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What a wonderful movie. I absolutely love this one. It was so fun to revisit, and you know, every time I've seen it, I've enjoyed it, and I don't know why I don't watch it more often, to be honest.
I completely agree.
Every
It had
time
been
I
years
revisit
since
it,
I'd
I'm
seen
like, oh yeah, I think we may have talked about it early on in our old podcast a long time ago.
And then we barely referenced it when we did Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah.
It was, I think that's kind of what in my head sparked it when we started talking about surreal comedies. I was like, oh, what about this? And what's interesting is when we first talked about doing it with part of the Surreal Comedies Festival, I was like, yeah, we should definitely do that. And then the closer that I got to watching it, I was like, is it a good fit, or is that like a little far outside the realm? Well, here's what's really interesting is that in doing my research, the one other big camp of influence that I found that, again, is a very cultural thing, it's very Chinese pop culture thing, is a genre of media that's called a molu tao, which basically means nonsensical slapstick humor, right? Mm-hmm. Here's the definition of what molu tao means.
Okay.
And tell me that this doesn't fit with everything else that we have done and that we're going to do.
Perfect.
Its humor arises from the placement of surprising and incongruous elements and the complex interplay of cultural subtleties. Typical constituents of this humor include nonsensical parodies, juxtaposition of contrasts, sudden surprises in spoken dialogue and action, and improbable and deliberate anachronisms. Generally, a molu tao scene gives one the feeling of incongruity, consistent of rapid comic banter and non sequiturs, as well as fourth wall referencing and breaking.
Yeah.
That's everything, right? That's
that is
Wet Hot American Summer. That's going to be our Monty Python film. That's going to be Brain Candy. So
the
really
thing that
is.
stuck out to me there was the cultural subtleties. I think that's
Yes.
huge because it was the Jewish camp in Wet Hot
Exactly,
American
exactly.
Summer, and here it's this small poor town in Shanghai in the 1940s.
And when we do Life of Brian, it's going to be a bunch of tongue-in-cheek jokes about their references to the Bible as well as deeply, deeply British humor, right? And so again, I think that's so it's really funny to be like, oh, in Chinese culture, this Molu Tao is very much a specific genre, and that apparently there was a lot of it that was happening in the 70s. And that now
He's
this
obviously
movie
inspired by,
and they said this movie is like one of the crowning jewels of the Molu Tao scene.
Great.
And you go, yeah, perfect, right? Because it is playing with all this really incongruous concepts and creating its own reality and its own physics.
but still being a parody and a farce at the same time.
Yes,
right?
still being that if you are a couple of American dudes who grew up, watching Kane and Kung Fu, we still get a lot of those references. Maybe not to the richness and depth that a Chinese audience might, but we still get it. We still get the parodies and where they're coming from. Yeah,
Great movie.
yeah, it really is.
So fun to revisit,
Definitely.
and I think totally fits into this festival. The last thing I'll say is, he goes through this final fight, and we get all the heroics and everything, and it's super fun, and you're definitely rooting for him and all that.
And
stuff.
at that point, he's a badass. Once he's gotten his chi cleared, he
essentially
straight
gets
up
his head hit off, and
Yep.
he's like like a cocoon is basically what they show. They show this butterfly coming
Yes.
out too, and that's him as well. Healing himself and becoming the one, and we get this stuff, and then
he's dressed exactly like Bruce Lee.
yep,
He is in this that
He
gi
looks
is
a
like
lot
this
like him,
tight
too.
white. Yeah, he does. He's like king badass. He doesn't look desperate
great.
anymore. He is focused.
we go through this huge fight. It's great. It's fun, and then we get this final scene where we get the mute girl who he's been pretty cruel to. Pretty
Totally.
much the whole movie,
Yeah.
except for when he saves her as a child, which, he still becomes cruel to her, maybe unintentionally, but also intentionally.
Yeah.
As well. And she's kind of walking, and she comes upon this lollipop store.
Yep.
And I'm like, huh?
Yeah. You're like, whose has a lollipop store?
And also, you've been broke this entire movie. Where did you get money to? Did he beat out $50,000 out of you?
Maybe
as well?
he sold all their axes. I don't know.
It was the only thing I was like, okay, it's a sweet sentiment. I get that part.
Yeah.
But
you're right. That ending
just
feels
kinda
more like
okay.
a Bollywood film where you're like,
Yeah.
and now we're gonna do a dance number, and you're like,
and everything's gonna be okay.
okay, fine, yeah, why
But
not?
again, didn't ruin the movie by any means. Love this movie. So fun to revisit.
Totally.
If you guys like this movie, please email us at deepdivefilmschool@gmail.com, or you can leave comments in the YouTube sections, or however else. That's pretty much it. We have Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. Please
carrier
go.
pigeon, maybe.
Yeah, carrier pigeon, whatever.
yeah,
we'll
yeah.
get it eventually. You
Yeah,
wanna
mail.
put your address down
Yeah,
here
do you
right
want
now?
me to put my home address
Could
down
you
at the
please?
bottom?
Thanks.
You put our address on YouTube? My wife
don't
would
tell
be,
her, don't
my
tell her,
wife would
it's
be
fine.
really stoked about that. They've seen our house.
But outside of him becoming Willy Wonka at the end, I think this is pretty great movie. Right?
They totally did. Yeah, at that point, I'm just like, they must have been like, go, everybody go home. They all live happily ever after. Go home. Go home. We spent all our money.
No, please like and subscribe. And yeah, continue to listen. And we're excited to continue this festival. We have all sorts of playlists on YouTube from our past festivals as well, if you want to go check those out and watch those as a group.
Yeah, to be fair, the first couple of sci-fi ones, the audio is a little rough, so we apologize. Maybe next year we'll revisit some of those again now that we've got it all of our audio sorted out.
Absolutely. But thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe.
Yeah.
And next week, I believe we are going to do Life of Brian.
Monty Python's Life of Brian.
All right.
All right, we'll see you then, you guys.
Thanks for watching.
Bye. Let's
So I finally hate watched After the Wedding.
Oh no, the American remake. And
Travesty.
oh, it?
Don't waste your time.
Who is it that's in it?
Tons of great actors, but
Yeah.
the whole time I was just like, it's not even close to as good. The whole time I know it's gonna happen, so like that kind of spoils it. But
Yeah.
For those who don't know, After the Wedding is one of my probably top 10
Mine
movies.
too. Mine
just
too.
Absolutely
All-timer.
stunning Suzanne Bier movie. Can we just put an open letter out to Suzanne Bier and say, I'm sorry as a country that would keep remaking your movies into shittier versions of your movies?
So the only thing that you're left to do is to go make Bird Box.
Yeah. And that now
His
you know,
brothers?
she's a Danish director,
Yes.
so maybe there'll be a Danish version of Bird Box that someone there remakes.
No, that an American filmmaker makes. And is it worse or better?
But it's in Danish.
Yeah, so I don't know.
Anyways,
I'm like, what's
After the Wedding just has these outstanding, powerful performances and this really deep, heavy family dynamic and just all of
twists
these things.
and turns, things you don't see coming. That are just
Amazing
like,
movie. And
so rough.
I just, you know, I interviewed her for our last podcast,
Yes.
and I asked her that, and she kind of brushed it off and said it was kind of, you know, it's compliment in a way. But to me, I'm just like, doesn't that drive you crazy?
Yeah.
I would be pissed off. No, anyways, I went into it with a cynical eye and stayed cynical the whole time. And I was, you know, I know we talked about it when it got released at Sundance this past year, but
It reminds me of...
I was more pissed off than anything. And
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sure if you haven't seen the other one, you would be like, oh, that's a good movie.
Right.
But you wouldn't see it and go, oh, that's a great movie. That's an all-time movie like I
like
did
you
with the
would
Danish
with the
one.
original one, yeah.
And that's what pisses me off.
It reminds me of... I remember back in the 90s, there was... Ani DeFranco put out this song on one of her records, and it was like just one of the songs on her record, and it was a fairly popular song, but you know, it was kind of like the rest of her stuff. It was folksy, but it was also really cutting and sort of acerbic and dark the way that most of her stuff is. And literally like less than 6 months later, this pop star, this total flash in a pan one-hit wonder, covered it and like made it sappy and saccharine, and for some reason like Ani DeFranco let her cover it too. And I kept hearing it on the radio. I mean, again, it only lasted probably as long as the American version of After the Wedding did. It's like, oh, it's just another thing somebody made, and it's like, you know, here and gone.
Yep.
But for the time, the fact that it existed on the planet as like a shitty reductive version of a thing I really liked, it just made me angry.
Well, when we were making the stop motion for this podcast, the beginning and the intro and the outro, we had music on in the background as we were doing it, and Toto's Africa came on, and you were like, oh, Weezer, awesome.
Yeah.